All right, so I'm doing a video real late, so I'm going to kind of talk quiet. I apologize. I'm having an insomnia night, so I'm just going to go ahead and do this video. This was one of the first videos I did on this channel back in March of last year. And there's a lot of things I said where I didn't have a clarity of understanding that I have now about ESTJs versus ENTJs, and had a lot of biases involved. I think I did the video before I was certified by Myers-Briggs, and that it created a bias, and a lot of my perspective was bias. Not that certifying Myers-Briggs is say all and end all, because it's really not, but I think that it helped me understand more about the preferences versus just the biases involved of sensing orientation versus intuitive orientation. So with that being said, let me dive into the real nitty gritty of this particular topic. So first off, all the TJs appear very similar in the way they extrovert. What they extrovert is they extrovert thinking. And that's what you're going to see typically with the TJ personality. ESTJs and ISTJs are a lot more abundant than ENTJs and INTJs for good reason. Okay, and we'll kind of dive into that in a minute, but for good reason. INTJs and ENTJs comprise a total of 3.9% of the population, whereas ISTJs and ESTJs, they comprise closer to 25% of the population, roughly. So maybe 27. So between 25 and 27% of the population. I don't have those numbers in front of me exactly. So, all right. So TJs appear very extroverted. They extrovert thinking, and they're very much about making decisions. That's what their primary thing is. So pretty much if you've got someone who's really interested in making decisions and coming to closure, that is going to be more of a TJ personality. Whereas FJs may take, not that they don't make decisions, but not in the way that we traditionally think of making decisions. See, we think of making decisions as in like structures and organizations and in the business world of making decisions. FJs, the ones that are focused on extroverting feeling and making decisions with feeling and extroverting it, they're going to appear a lot more patient, even though they may not be. They're still quick to come to conclusions, but they're going to appear that way because, again, they're keeping your feelings in mind. They're keeping the way that they're delivering that information is not so systems focused. So we typically may not brand them as making rapid decisions, even though they are very capable of doing so. TJs look much more like that. Now, I do want to say something particularly about TJs versus FJs. Then we'll go into STJs versus NTJs. So FJs extrovert feeling, and they feel that the world outside of themselves is very, very objective. Obviously, the world of feeling outside of themselves is objective, and they're catering to this objectivity, whereas inside the logic is principled and it's structured. And whereas TJs are the complete opposite. They feel that the real meaning is in the internal world, the feeling world, and they feel that the extroverted world, the object-oriented world, is cold and impersonal. And that, so they have a kind of a flip here. And we'll kind of dive into details about that a little more in the future, but they're going to appear very differently, ultimately, in the way they make decisions. So when we think of making decisions, we think of the TJ personality more than anything else. And that's why they're commonly seen that as decisive and often outspoken. Even the ISTJ can be outspoken if something is not correct or logically consistent. So ISTJ and INTJ, they can appear very, very introverted at times and extremely introverted at times, whereas the ENTJ and the ESTJ can appear very extroverted at times, even though we'll talk a little more about that in detail too. All right, so let's talk about the ESTJ first. The ESTJs like to organize projects. They like to organize procedures and people, and then act to get those things done. Their primary objective, like the ENTJ, is getting things done. That's regardless of what ESTJ or ENTJ. It's a common trait between them both. The ESTJ, however, lives by a set of clear standards and beliefs, and they make a systematic effort to follow those beliefs or standards and expect the same from everyone else. And They also value efficiency, and that's another thing, is they also value efficiency, much like the ENTJ. Now, when I say they value these standards and beliefs, and they live to follow these, it's not that the ENTJ doesn't want to follow their own beliefs, or they don't live by a clear set of standards. The ENTJ is always looking to improve their own standards, whereas the ESTJ, if it works, don't fix it. That's the difference. That's one of the differences between the types, and we'll get into that in just a minute here. So, what else? So I like to jot some notes down so I can prevent the ranting a little bit. So let's go on to talk about the differences. So they both lead with extroverted thinking. And extroverted thinking is, again, getting things done, and that's what they're going to be extroverting. So you're going to see this in all four of these types, the TJs, all the TJs. And if you look at the Myers-Briggs chart, they're going to be the four corners. That chart is very, very much organized to keep information very sequential. Sensing is on the left, intuitive's on the right, TJs there, you have the FJs there in like the second rows, the FJs, and they're on the corners of those rows, the middle rows, or middle columns rather. They're on the corners of the middle columns, first row and last row. It's organized in a very effective manner to keep types organized. So that's completely irrelevant to this video. All right, so ESTJs, here's where they differ than ENTJs. They have an introverted sensing and extroverted intuition function, whereas the ENTJ has an introverted intuition and extroverted sensing function. So in a cognition standpoint, the ESTJ is focused on the present. Their primary thing that is held into their vision is what is real and actual. They apply and adapt relevant past experience, so that relevant information they contrive from the past, they apply that to their current situation. Okay, so that's they want to see those things come to fruition. They make sure they can apply that past experience and then deal with the problems of today with things that have worked in the past. They prefer jobs which are, these results are rather immediate. So they want to see something rise up in the moment. They want to see something happen here and now. That makes them very practical, realistic, matter of fact, and focused on the details, systematic, very pragmatic, very, like I said, very practical. They're focused on real and tangible results now. That is because this introverted sensing function, which if you haven't seen the introverted sensing video, you need to see that video, because that will help explain the ESTJ's orientation toward what is, and then what has been versus what will be. Okay, so the ESTJ, their primary focus is getting things done. So they'll use that past experience to do that. When that past experience fails, they'll tap into their extroverted intuition and look for new possibilities based on past experience, which SINE. Look at new possibilities that are rooted in past experience to see trajectories, and they'll use those trajectories, use the current thing in the moment to see where it's projecting to be in a period of time, and then come up with a new possibility that could be. Okay, it could be this way because here's what we see in the past. But again, they trust the past, and they look at the future with caution. They have this caution toward the future. So they're not often seen as visionaries, even though they're very capable of being visionaries. They're often not seen that way. If they are, they will distort their vision so much in the sense of practical realities. It almost is no longer called a vision. It's called a plan, and it's a plan of action, step 1 through step 377. And you'll see that quite a bit. Is the STJs are very focused on crossing all their T's and dotting all their I's. This is what often gives them the stereotype of being micromanagers. STJs more than any other type are known for this, and hence why they're great in business, because they will manage the pieces of the puzzle. They will manage those small pieces and make things happen, and they will want to make sure all procedures are being followed as long as those procedures are effective. If the STJ finds that the procedures are ineffective, they will gladly innovate that to make that better. So they're usually excellent system administrators because they understand systems and logistics really well. And the ESTJ is often called the executor. Not that they execute people, although some may feel that way. They're called the executor because they get things done based on what needs to be done. They can project the appropriate steps needed to accomplish a task, and they look at the potential problems, what could happen wrong with that tertiary extroverted intuition, and then they assign duties and get the jobs done through that way. They want to make sure nothing is unresolved or any unfinished business. They want to tie up all the loose ends. This is what makes them so attention to detail focused. When they see that something is really not working, they'll plan and get it done. That's what they're focused on. Otherwise, they prefer things that have proven and worked and don't need to be altered. Again, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And they're because of this, they're also very focused on the bottom line. What does it mean now? What is it going to result in now? Not so much what the implication is going to be in the future. So you'll find that ESTJs pretty much dominate in the entire corporate world. They're the #1 depiction of what success is in American society. Now, if you live in another country, I'm not sure what it's like in your world, but in American society, STJs, especially ESTJs, are seen as the ideal person. This is a bias and should not be considered as anywhere near truth, because it is not true. I think every type has its unique contributions, and if we learn to effectively communicate with each type, then we're able to find out how they can contribute to an overall picture. And that is what makes Myers-Briggs so interesting, is learning how to determine how to communicate to other types and how to receive their message effectively by lowering your own or flexing your own cognitive understanding, or your cognitive abilities. You have to flex those cognitive functions for you to be able to understand them a little more. So if I'm talking to, say, a rival type, I may struggle understanding their message, because as the receiver, I may be in my own mode of receiving, and I have to know that this person is this type and I need to receive this message. So ESTJs should not be seen as ideal. They should be seen as effective. They should be seen as for what they are. They're good at getting a job done. That's really what they root down into. So you'll also see them as pretty self-confident, conscientious, and dependable based on what works in the past. So you often see them as successful, whereas NTJs probably not as much. Last thing about STJs before we dive into NTJs and really get into that is they can be seen as, if they fail to develop their extroverted thinking function, they can often be seen as not reliable of evaluating information, just making decisions on the fly, and thus make inconsistent or overly harsh decisions. So you'll see a lot of ESTJs who haven't developed their thinking function, even though it's the dominant function. And a common miscue is a lot of people believe that because you have a dominant function, you're good at it. That's not true. Like, it really is not true. It depends on your life circumstances, how well you use that function. Like, for example, I'm left-handed. That's my dominant hand. Does that imply that I'm really good at handwriting? No, it doesn't. What if I've written wrong my entire life? It's the same with the cognitive functions. If you don't get trained, or you're not effectively seeking more information to improve those functions, capabilities, then you're probably not doing the right thing. So keep that in mind, that just because someone's a dominant extroverted thinker, they may not be good at extroverted thinking. So keep out for weaknesses in their personality type and areas that you need to develop in your own personality type as well. So an ESTJ who has not developed their thinking may make inconsistent or overly harsh decisions without considering logical alternatives. If they haven't developed their sensing function, they may make decisions too quickly before they've taken enough information, like I said. So that sensing is important, taking in more information. And then their decisions will reflect their previously. So they make decisions off previously formed biases or previous judgments. So if they've made a decision before in the past that's very similar, they might just make a decision off of that without actually taking in more information. Because STJs, they depend on data to make decisions. They don't make decisions without data. So if you want somebody that's an STJ to make a decision, you need to give them enough information. ISTJs never have enough information. You can give them everything in the world and it's not enough. What I mean by that is like, no, I mean, they will make a decision, but what I mean by that is that they're never going to be overwhelmed by too much information. ISTJs are very much about, give me all the data first, and then I will make a conclusive decision, whereas ESTJs say, give me enough data to where I can make a decision. See the difference? ESTJs use data as a tool to make decisions. ISTJ make decisions based off data. So their data is their primary aim. Their data is the primary focus. They want to make sure that data is obviously effective in giving information, and that's their prime focus, is to support and compare data with the past. That's their primary aim. That's what's front and center in their own cognition. ESTJs can appear as intrusive, know-it-all experts, overpowering others and refusing to listen, and they may get impatient with people who don't follow procedures exactly. They don't understand why people break rules that are seemingly there with purpose. Whereas other STJs may feel that rules are stupid and they need to be fixed because they don't result in anything. Who made this dumb rule? So again, they're practical. They're not about just going to follow rules blindly, because they don't just charge into battle with their eyes closed. Okay, follow rules blindly. They're more interested in making sure that everything works to the best of its ability. ESTJs and ENTJs can also appear very much the same in the way that they actually process their feelings. So this is where a lot of people get it mixed up. Everybody thinks, I made another video about everybody's ENTJ dads and parents. More likely, if you think someone's an ENTJ, it's very possible and most likely that they're STJ. Numbers don't lie. And so I love how everybody types everybody as an ENTJ, but the truth is they're probably an STJ. And I've called a lot of people out on this. And again, I'm a little biased. I know NJs are extremely rare. They comprise, let's see, 1.8, 2.1, 3.9. Yeah. They comprise roughly a little less than 8% of the population. So I'm naturally, if anybody says they're an NJ, I'm going to be skeptical. Or somebody that knows an NJ, I'm going to be skeptical for the sole fact that I want to make sure they're not being biased. You know, ENTJs are total dicks, so therefore this person's an ENTJ. So I tend to call attention to that really quickly. I'm like, are you sure? Now, I laugh because I did that to somebody who said, what if you're an ESTJ? And I laughed and I said, it's very possible, but it's not. Okay, so I don't really consider that as a possibility because I know these types well enough to understand the difference, but there are a few that do that. So I don't take a lot of pride in necessarily being this and only this, but I do take pride in being myself. And I take a lot of pride in other types too, and other people being those types and what they can contribute to the situation. So if ESTJs, like I said, their feelings may appear very similar to ENTJs in the sense that their emotions and impacts on people are just not considered, which is very often. Their feeling is very introverted. They see the world as this. They see their inner world of feeling as confusing. They can often see that. If they fail to develop their intuition, they may not see the wider ramifications of seemingly simple direct action. So here's an example of what may happen if they fail to use their intuition. They can micromanage to death and not realize that they're draining the employees over a period of time, and it's going to result in a negative consequence or a HR problem in the future. They also may fail to understand or appreciate people's extroverted feeling. Types that extrovert feeling, like the SFJs, may tend to get on the STJ's nerves. They'll have a common understanding, but they'll also find that their lack of directness is going to create a problem, which we can talk about. So other types need to learn how to adapt to the ESTJ. And remember, in communication, it's the receiver that's important. So if a communication goes bad, whoever's sending the message is generally at fault, because you got to consider the receiver. How does this person receive information? And that's what you need to understand from a communication standpoint. All right, so let's go into the ENTJ and I'm not going to cover INTJ and the ISTJ very much, for the sole fact that they're very similar. I don't need to go into the difference between having a dominant function on top and a dominant or the auxiliary function on top. It doesn't really make a difference in the way that this is. So it's generally STJ, NTJ. Okay. So ENTJs are seen as natural leaders and organization builders, and they're builders in the sense of the long-term picture, not so much as laying stone by stone. They conceptualize and theorize readily and translate the possibilities into plans to achieve short and long-term objectives. So it's not about what has been done or what could be done based on the past. It's what could be and what will be. If I do this, this is going to result in this. They have a natural knack for seeing illogical and inefficient procedures because they see something else or they're theorizing something else in their head, and they feel the same strong urge to correct them. They see it in a different way though. ESTJs are like, okay, I worked in this company in the past, and I've seen a more effective method, and our method doesn't match that, so I'm going to fix it. Whereas the ENTJ is like, why are you doing this? Like, if you look at this, it obviously can be 10 times better. You're wasting so many resources right here, because if you combine those two things, then that's what's going to result as a result of this. That's what's going to happen. And so, and these intuitive hunches may not be reflected on past experience. Now, again, intuition is introverted in the INTJ and sensing is introverted in the Estj. So you may see them both say, here's what's going to happen. Okay. You got to ask or determine how they're actually comparing that data. If they're comparing it with past experience, it's often very much of a sensing oriented thing. If they're comparing it with, not even comparing it, if they're actually looking at the future and they're seeing how it's going to come out as a result of that future orientation, then it's going to appear, they're going to be more likely intuitive. And so you have to understand where they're getting that data. That data is conceptualized in their head. It's very like an Entj, where if it's compared with the past, it's very much of an Estj. Entjs are very focused in moving people in the right direction. They're not as interested in micromanaging. They don't feel the need to cross all their I's or dot all their I's and cross all their T's. That's not their primary aim. They're looking at the big picture. They're kind of like looking over everything, like over. They're not micromanagers by nature. They can be and they will be, but they're challenging the status quo, and therefore there's no set procedure for the way things should be done in the ENTJ's mind. So when you hear somebody say this is the way it should be done, it's probably not an ENTJ, because they're not getting that data. They either say, here's how I want it done, here's how it's going to happen, here's how we need it to be done, but not necessarily here's how it should be done, because they're not really their focus is not on archetypes. Now, again, if somebody says should, it doesn't mean it rules them out from being the ENTJ, but just keep that in mind as you're trying to determine the difference between the two. ENTJs, I'm saying E, but really NTJs in general are strategic visionaries, adept at planning for the future needs of people and organizations for which they're responsible for. Wow, my language is really jacked up. But they're responsible for these people moving forward. And they want to make sure these people are empowered to do their job. They highly, because as NTs, they expect competence. That's their number one thing, is competence. So they're less likely to be micromanagers and more focused on getting people competent enough and empowering people to where they do their job so that they can continue pursuing the future and not focus here and now. Last thing an NTJ wants is here and now. That's the last thing I want to do. Every NTJ I've known and confirmed as an NTJ does not want to be here and now. They want to be ahead. They want to be in the future. They want to look at big picture. So crossing their T's and dotting their I's is the last thing they want to do. So when I hear about these everybody has an ENTJ boss apparently, or an ENTJ dad, and when I hear about them micromanaging them to death, I'm thinking, you're probably working with an Estj by nature. All right. Now, again, you can have an underdeveloped NTJ who does not trust people enough to do their job, but that's not likely. If that's the case, an NTJ wants to empower people, more specifically an ENTJ. INTJs being the most independent of all types. INTJs 100% are independent. They don't want anything to do with anybody or anything. They don't want anything. They just want to be their own. They're lone visionaries. They can be extroverted at times. They can mold with people at times, but the INTJ is probably the most naturally independent of all types. And if it were up to them, they would, disappear, and they would just make things happen quietly behind the scenes, and nobody would ever notice them. And that's what would be ideal for them, is to spend more time reflecting on their planning. So ENTJs are more concerned with empowering people because it saves them time. ESTJs don't care about necessarily empowering people naturally because they're interested in getting the job done. What's the most important thing to an STJ is getting the job done and getting it done right. Whereas an ENTJ is like, we still got to get the job done, but what's the most effective way for me to get the job done, and not me personally? How do I conserve my time? It may take 1 or 2 more extra days to get the job done, but here's what's going to happen. I can get future jobs done much quicker. Job dones. Okay. Wow. You can't speak. So that's another thing about the ENTJ that you have to understand, is they're willing to make those compromises in the present moment to build a better future. And that's very common for an NTJ personality, is compromise the moment. Hence why a lot of NTJs don't have huge savings accounts. They're not interested in something that slowly builds over time. They're interested in the long-term result. They don't want the slow. They want the fast. They want the speed. They want the most effective way. They want the quickest way. They want the biggest picture way. And if it compromises the moment, then you're going to see a lot of NTJ is just kind of like, okay, I have $40. You know, if I invest 39 of those dollars into this semi-potential business, it could result in another $40, or it could cost me that $40. But you know what? Something I'm going to gain from this experience regardless. Whereas an STJ may think, wow, that's going to compromise my security. Or my father always told me that I needed to make sure I have a good savings account. Or make sure you shut off all your lights at night. Or make sure that you unplug all your equipment because it may start a fire. And, you know, this is the SJ way, is just reflecting on the past, where the NJs are like, starts a fire, you know what? That's okay, because things are going to get better, but I'm not going to waste time and do that. Obviously, I'm going to take what I call a calculated risk. So it doesn't mean if I know it's going to start a fire, I'm definitely going to unplug it. That's not the point. The point is it's a calculated risk. NJs are much more risk takers than SJs naturally. Not that SJs don't take risks. SJs are going to need a lot more information to take risk. NJs are going to plunge into risk. They enjoy the unknown. That's the thing. NPs enjoy the new, and they're excited by the new. NJs enjoy the unknown. And so when it comes to a risk that the outcome is unknown, NJs thrive in that. They enjoy that moment. And so NTJs, they're natural critics. They set their own standards, not standards set by society or standards. And they're often guilty of applying these standards to others. And they apply them to organizations, and they apply these standards to themselves. And this is one of the weak spots about the NTJ armor, is that they apply these high standards that they struggle with being good enough. I think all intuitives have this issue, is they never feel like they reach their potential. They always expect more from themselves. Whereas SJs, they may feel accomplished because they got their PhD, because that's what society has established. And they may feel accomplished because they, you know, make over $100,000 a year. You know, if you ask me, I think $100,000 a year is pocket change. That's my personal thing, because my vision is so large. I don't think it's very much money. I think that's like you're just getting started. Whereas a lot of people are like, what? That's a lot of money. You know, 6 figures is something else. And I'm thinking, no, not really. You know, and that's where, and that's in all honesty, that's not a boast. It's not a bragging. It's just, I just don't see it as a lot of money. So, you know, if I were making $300,000 a year, I wouldn't think I'm just rich. I would just be like, okay, you know, I'm all right, or I don't make enough money yet, but it's not that much. It's not that much to me. Whereas an SJ may think that they may be guilty of using this as a societal establishment, that I make, you know, 98% more than the rest of the population, and therefore I must be awesome, or I must be successful. Whereas NJs are looking beyond that. They're looking beyond just what you're doing now. What can you do in the future? Or in the big picture, how does that make you successful? Are you happy? Are you, you know, what makes you think you're so successful? Is it because society thinks you're successful? Is it because you have a good degree? Is it because you have these things? You know, I think anybody's successful as long as they're happy. I don't really connotate it with money anymore like I used to when I was younger, because again, I was given a bunch of archetypes about what success was. But of course, naturally, as an NJ, I let it go. I just thought around it, and I was like, that's not right. So one thing that NTJs absolutely hate is ignorance. They just like STJs will have a little more patience when it comes to teaching you procedure, as long as you're receptive. NJs just expect you to naturally just know it, or just pick up an order relatively quickly. So here's a weak spot in NJ armor, is they highly expect that you have a level of competence. Here's the biggest difference between NTJ and in STJ, is that they're very focused on having curiosity and seeking new ideas and solving complex problems. They want to conceive possibilities, and they conceive those insights and the possibilities, the ideas that they create, help them make their decisions and plans. And so this makes them very conceptual, global thinkers and innovative theorizers and planners. And these are the things that they really are focused on, is that planning process. So you'll see a lot of this, but it's planning so much, not much about, like, for example, an NJ plan is going to look more like, you're going to see, sorry, that was probably a really loud deal. You're probably going to see something more like, with an NJ, you'll see, okay, gather resources. Okay, it's not very specific, but it's intuitive to them how to gather resources. So they may not lay that out detail by detail. Now, what happens in an organization is if an NJ leads the organization, they're going to tell their financial officer, hey, or their ops person, I need a report on how much resources you all are going to gather for these things, and then they'll comprise the final report because they'll get that data from someone else and throw it in the report. Whereas STJs are naturally prone to put that in the report naturally. So again, the workplace values STJs a lot more because they're giving the details that other STJ wants, other STJs need. Whereas intuitives, NJs, don't necessarily need all the data because they see it as intuitive. They see it as looking at being myopic. Whereas NJs tend to have the guilt of being hyperopic, where they focus on the big picture so much that they miss the details right in front of them. NTJs typically can be excellent problem solvers and organizational problems. They understand connections within organizations, and gives them that strategic side. This is what makes them the strategy-oriented people. They're very strategy-oriented, whereas STJs are more tactical. No, I'm sorry, no, not even tactical. They're systems logisticians. My talking is bad right now. And so they think way ahead, and NTJs anticipate problems, devise broad plans and systems, and marshal human and material resources to achieve these goals and these things. Mainly the ENTJ is more interested in marshaling those resources to get it done. The INTJ is more focused on the planning side of things and making sure, anticipating the problems that are coming and then learning how to solve them before they actually come. The NTJs are also not at all interested in routine maintenance activities, and they prefer new challenges. They don't like routine. So this is a big thing about STJs versus NTJs, is routine. The ST personality is naturally in a routine. It's like, wake up, do this, 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 this. If I'm in the same routine every day, I feel miserable. It's like something needs to change. I need to innovate my environment. I need to change things. So both types are very stimulated by conversation, but the E types, ESTJ and ENTJ, they're stimulated by conversation and interaction with people. Both types can challenge people's statements, but the reason why they challenge is different. The STJ challenges because they in a sense, want to prove you wrong. The NTJ challenges because that's how they actually gather information. Like STJs will gather information usually from history, whether through a mentorship or history or something someone has done before that's more prone for them. NTJs gather information from stimulating conversation to invoke new ideas. So this is a different method of perceiving information. They want new ideas, so they get in conversation, and they tend to be challenging to ask questions that no one else will ask to gain understanding. That's what it's really for. It's not because they want to be a dick. Where an STJ feels like they proved you wrong, they don't need to dig any further, where an NTJ will prove you wrong and keep digging and digging and digging. And this is why NTJs are seen as brutal, because they'll keep asking and asking and asking, trying to get every angle to have a full understanding of what you're talking about, to make sure they're adding to their own database of information and theoretical ideas. They want mutual learning typically to take place, and they will seek out NTJs in general prefer not to have mentorship naturally. They feel that they will gather all the information and let that information synthesize. They don't want somebody telling them hands-on every day, you need to create a checklist, okay? Every day you knock out item A, item B, item C, item D. They don't want that. They have to do things in their own way. They don't want a system to be confined to. So NTJs are typically not likely to want to ask for help. They typically will just try to solve it on their own. If they do ask for help, it's generally in an area that they have no expertise in at all. Or they greatly admire someone's skills in an area, and they want to learn the most effective and efficient way to do that without having to spend hours and hours and hours researching information. I would say INTJs are even more guilty of this than ENTJs. ENTJs are willing to understand, and they're willing to communicate, and the mentorship idea may appeal to them in some areas, whereas an INTJ is like, shut up and give me your audiobook. I don't want to hear you talk. So NTJs in general, like STJs, prefer things to be settled and clear. But the difference is STJs, they're so focused on here and now that if there's nothing to discuss, they'll cut you off, whereas NTJs can be seen as a little more NTP-ish in a way that they actually ask questions because they're always looking to gather more data. not data, but the love of ideas. So they're very interested in the theoretical things that take them into a different realm. Now, again, it has to have a practical purpose. It's not just because we love information for the sake of information, which there are things that we do, but mainly if it can't be applied, if that theory is completely useless to my daily activities, or if I'm focused at the job at hand, then it may not be relevant, and we really don't just want the idea in itself. It has to have some kind of future tool. So NTJs are building toolboxes. They're building toolboxes of things that they could use in the future. Just remember that when you're talking to an NTJ, they're trying to take an information of things they're for the future. They're adding things to their tool chest. Whereas STJs are adding information to their tool chest too, but in a different way. It's from the past, and it's not in the realm of ideas and theories. Whereas NTJs are focused on ideas and theories and give me all your data so that it stimulates some kind of insight in me to move forward. Whereas SJs are reflecting on the past. Okay, this has happened 100 times. It's going to happen again. All right. This would makes them very attracted to ideas and theoretical discussions because they feel like they're going to get something out of it, and it's some kind of tool. They want to get that. Whereas an STJ is like, what is the point? What is the purpose? You may not be accomplishing anything. Sitting around and thinking all day is not going to help you. All right, so that's some advantages. Now, NTJs who fail to develop intuition may make their decision too quickly, like the STJs who fail to develop their sensing. But the NTJs would fail to do that without considering alternatives or exploring other possibilities. So they're so focused on this one conclusion that they're not willing to explore other possibilities, which is STJs are guilty of too. STJs who haven't developed their sensing may not take in enough data before making decisions. The NTJs may not look at enough possibilities before making decisions. Does that make sense? That's supposed to make sense here. So that should make sense. I hope it does. It's late. It's like 3:30 in the morning. So in this case, their decisiveness can become very authoritarian or totalitarian in the way that they manage, is because they're not looking at alternative ideas for the future. They're just doing one. This is the way it is, and this is the way it's going to be, and that's it. Whereas STJs, they just don't take enough data if they haven't developed their sensing. So again, look at how if you're a manager or boss or parents or whatever, you're suspecting they're an STJ or an NTJ. One thing you want to look at is what kind of data are they seeking? NTJs are going to be seeking theoretical, abstract ideas. They want possibilities. So if you're approaching me with, so the numbers are this, and the books are balanced this, and they're not balanced here, blah, 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 and the expenses are this, blah, 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 and the details, blah, 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 you're going to bore me to death. What I want to hear is future possibilities. Okay, you can tell me where we're at now, but give me a summary, like what's going on right now. I want to look at what's going on. So if you're coming to me, it has to be very oriented toward the future. So if I hear, looking at our numbers, it may be possible that we should start this product line, or it could be possible that we do this, or it could be possible that we do this, or here's a probable idea, or here's something I saw in the market. Those ideas are very important to me, and I add them to my tool chest. And I also flag them in my email. So when someone sends me ideas, I flag it in the email, and I know to readdress it later when it needs to be addressed. So those are things that are great about Microsoft Outlook 365. Okay, moving on. So that's one thing. And if ENTJs haven't developed their thinking process, which like STJs is very possible, they may not have a way to evaluate their insights. So their possibilities may be so far-fetched that they actually can't become a reality, or their decision making is inconsistent and it changes. It just doesn't stay consistent at all. They go from one decision back to another, and they go contradictory all the time. That's very common. And like ESTJs and STJs in general, their inferior functions are the same. So ISTJ and their feeling functions are the same. So the ISTJ has introverted tertiary feeling, or tertiary introverted feeling, and so does the INTJ. And then the ESTJ and the ENTJ have both inferior introverted feeling, which makes all these types very capable of failing to notice another person's needs, or for personal connection, appreciation, or praise. So these four types are naturally not into compliments or praising others. Fail to factor in their plans for people's needs for support and processing time, so because they move so fast that they may not appreciate or respect that some people need time. And overlook specifics and realistic factors that are necessary to carry their plans to completion. So now keep in mind that because the Entj is a extroverted sensor, tertiary position, the Entj is likely to overlook details. Now, this is a big difference. Key point headliner here between the ESTJ and the ENTJ is that the ENTJ is likely to overlook details that are necessary to carry plans to completion. Whereas if an ESTJ, like I said before and previously on my notes here, ESTJ may not always see the wider ramifications of their actions because they're tertiary extroverted intuition, whereas an ENTJ may overlook those specifics and realistic factors that are necessary to carry their plans to completion. The data right here, what's going on right now. So they may have a great idea, and they can see how it's going to come into their head, and they start executing that action. Whereas in the way something pops up and goes, big red flag, you need to address this issue now before it gets a problem. Well, an ENTJ is like, everything's great, so it's gonna resolve itself. Keep going. That's a sign of underdeveloped tertiary extroverted sensing. They're not addressing something right here and now. Okay. Last thing is both of these ESTJ and ENTJ types are likely to have this deep and intimate sensitivity, emotional sensitivity, and huge sentimental streaks. You just don't see it. That's really what it is. It's a very private part of me. I don't share it, and I think ESTJs may feel the same way. They just don't feel comfortable sharing it. And I had an FI video I make, and it's on my channel, and it goes into some of this detail, but that's like the very tip of the iceberg of some of the things that really go on in the internal soul of the INTJ. So I told this to an INTJ who's not as familiar with Myers-Briggs as I am, and I told him about, my inferior introverted feeling and his inferior extroverted sensing, kind of the difference between our inferior functions. And he told me, he said, you know what, that's what I really respect and admire about you, that inferior introverted feeling. And I said, really? Because it's really underdeveloped. He goes, well, he goes, well, it's what you strive to be, though, and where you're going to be because of that, in your morality and your values. And he's like, even though you're likely to compromise them here and now, it's where you're going with them that's important, and where you want to take them and how you want to develop them. And that's a part I appreciate about your character, which getting a compliment from an INTJ is like finding gold. So it meant a lot to me because they don't give them, and I don't give them. And it was also very sincere, and it came from his soul. You could tell he was very sincere about this. And that was a huge compliment, and for me, and I'm not a person that likes compliments naturally. So just keep that in mind, that I think we should all value that inferior function. But this could go on a whole other tangent, so I'm going to cut that off now. So anyway, feel free to ask any questions about the difference between these two types. It's mainly in the introverted sensing, introverted intuition aspect. Okay, think of it like an hourglass. They're like standing back to back like a duel, right? The ESTJ and the ENTJ. ENTJ is looking toward the future. ESTJ is looking toward the past. They're both moving horizontally this way into getting the job done, but the ENTJ is doing it with this perspective, okay? This lens this way. They're doing it this way. Whereas the ESTJ is doing it that way. They're looking at what's going on outside. They're looking at the past, okay? So they're reflecting on where it has been and to make sure everything's right, because they're lining up everything with these archetypes. If you haven't seen that SI video, I'm telling you, you need to watch it, because you won't understand the STJ if you don't understand SI, okay? You have to understand introverted sensing. So whereas ENTJs will care less about what has been and more about what will be, so they're focusing this way. So they have two different perspectives from getting the job done, hence why they work really well together, as long as they mutually respect each other's decision-making processes as TJs, okay? Keep that in mind, and that's the biggest difference. Keep it also in mind that naturally, you should determine someone who if they're an EXTJ and you're not sure if they're an N or an S. Keep in mind that that sensing and intuition thing, that's really huge to determine their type. But again, you'll never know for sure, because truthfully, MBTI specifically also states that people pick their types. So if you told an INFP that they're an INFP, but they're really actually an INTJ, then as far as they think, I'm sorry, let me put it this way. If you told an INTJ someone who believes they're an INTJ, that they're an INTP, they're still an INTJ. It's because the person knows themselves and under the assumption that they know themselves best. Okay, so you may know a certain side of them, an aspect of them, but it's under the impression that people know themselves best. And so if they're skeptical about their type, and we can talk about that in another video too, but if they're skeptical about their type, then you can always offer input and information. But if they're pretty set on it, I wouldn't mess with them, okay, unless they ask. Like, I naturally doubt a lot of people's types, but I don't say anything. I want them to come to that conclusion. I want them to know. But I will say something like, huh, that's funny. I didn't think you were that type, but you know, I got a different impression from you. But I'm not saying, oh no, you are absolutely not that type, because I know you better than you know yourself. No, that's not the case. Anyway, so never tell someone what they are. Like, you are this, okay? Like, that's really offensive, because if someone did that to me, I'd be pretty pissed off. Like, you don't know me. Like, you don't know me like that. How are you going to tell me exactly what goes through my head? Like, if you suggest, like, you give me a lot of indications that you're this type, that's one thing. But as far as telling me exactly how I am, I'm like, dude, I'm so complex. You don't even know the first thing about me. So don't act like you know who I am, or what I know, or what I experience, or how I see the world, or anything. Okay. All right. So with that being said, I hope this video brought value and content to you all. And sorry for the late night and my inability to communicate or speak appropriately. All right. Well, I hope you have a good rest of the night. Thanks so much.